Hello, I'm Grant Holt, and I'm recording this on my iPhone. Before the show starts, I wanted to point out two things. First, in order to avoid what my lawyers are calling copyright infringement, I had to cut the music. Don't worry, we still name the songs, and they're all available on CD and vinyl right now. Find them wherever music is sold. Secondly, I had to splice together two different recordings of the show, so there's going to be a jump in audio quality about 10 minutes in. Huge thanks to Steve Holt and Sam Slavkin for recording the broadcast. Now, on to the show. Hello. Welcome to a Jolt of Holt, the only radio show that doesn't have a PhD in biophysical chemistry, but someone here tonight does. He holds a bachelor's in chemistry from Swarthmore and a PhD in biophysical chemistry from Stanford. He's taught as a professor of chemistry and biochemistry at Mount Holyoke. He was the dean of Oberlin's College of Arts and Sciences. He was a visiting scientist at MIT. He's won research grants from the Federal National Science Foundation, the Alzheimer's Association, and Dreyfus Foundation. He's authored multiple scholarly articles and pieces for the New York Times and Washington Post. He's received a number of national awards for scholarship, including the National Science Foundation Career Award and the Henry Dreyfus Teacher Scholar Award. He was named Emerging Scholar of 2007 by Diverse Issues in Higher Education magazine, and in 2013, he became the 19th president of Kenyon College. President Sean Decatur, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Grant. No, it's really great to be here, and thank you for that introduction. I am feeling very nervous now about living up to any of the things that are on that list, but thank you.
No, it's incredibly impressive. In preparation for the show, I've done so much research, honestly, pages and pages of notes.
Yes.
And the one thing that really just blew me away was your history, background in science, your education in chemistry and biochemistry, which was frankly very interesting considering you're the head of a very literary and writing-centered college, right? So, I mean, what's that like? How is your science background shaped your leadership of Kenyon?
Yeah. Well, and I think that and I have to give appropriate props to the sciences here, in that the sciences have always been a part of the liberal arts. If you go back to the conception of the liberal arts in medieval universities, the astronomy, mathematics, logic, were sort of key essential pieces of the liberal arts equation. So I think actually, as we think about Kenyon and Kenyon's history, the role of the natural sciences throughout Kenyon's history have been a really strong part of the educational program here. And there's a long legacy of just amazing alums who have graduated and gone on to have really significant impact in the field of the sciences. And so I feel honored to be a part of that larger legacy of Kenyon and the marriage of the intensive study and understanding of the natural sciences, but putting it in the larger context of the liberal arts and what it means to have an influence on the understanding of what it means to be human and the understanding of how to have an impact on the broader world.
Right, that's fantastic. I mean, also though, it's an interesting transition from going from such an academic background to being the executive administrator of a university. What was that transition like, from going from academics to administration?
Yeah, and for me, the educational experience has always been at the center of my work. And so whether it's the work that I do in a classroom with students around a seminar table or in thinking about the larger function of the college, it's how to make sure that we are providing the best learning environment for students possible, the best educational environment for students possible. And so, it's really an elevation from thinking about just specifically a small group of students in one class to thinking about the entire institution and how the entire experience of students can be strengthened. And so to me, the core of what's motivated me has always stayed the same.
Even with this scientific background, you're really not out of place here, because you yourself are quite an accomplished writer. I know you've written pieces for the Washington Post, op-eds for the New York Times, and even an essay for an anthology. Speaking of that essay, I found that essay very, very compelling and very sincere. It was for Rust Belt Chic, the Cleveland anthology, which comprised multiple essays by and for residents of Cleveland. In it, you described your experiences growing up in Cleveland. What was writing that essay like? What sort of compelled you to be part of that anthology? What was that like?
I think that there is, and the I'd say there are two big motivations. One is that I was honored to be invited to be a part of a group of writers who have deep connections to Cleveland. Those who know me know that I am super proud of my hometown and the many ways in which I think Cleveland is just a wonderful place to live and a great example of a great American city. And so for me, it was an honor to be a part of writers who came together to write about and talk about experiences of life in Northeast Ohio, including, actually, I really honored one of the other contributors to that anthology is Connie Schultz, who's the award-winning journalist who is also married to Sherrod Brown, who just won re-election this past week. It was an honor to be a part of that. The other thing is, I do think that as I reflect on my experience in growing up in Cleveland, for me, a lot of my growing up experience was about crossing boundaries of different ways, and that essay talks about boundary crossing. I grew up in the city. I grew up very much immersed in the not only African American and African American family, but a part of the sort of proud African American community on the east side of Cleveland. I had the opportunity to go to a wonderful school on the far east side in the suburbs, and that essay actually, in tracing out the bus route from the city out to the distant suburbs, is really about what it's like to go through that boundary transition of different worlds and different perspectives. And that, to me, has been just an important part of my larger life reflection on, not only on my own personal experience, but in the broader context of the ways in which we often sort of cross different types of cultural boundaries, different types of geographic boundaries on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. And going back to those different perspectives of Cleveland, I mean, in the essay you describe seeing how some people see Cleveland only for its grittiness, but not you. Like, what was Cleveland to a young Sean Decatur?
Yeah, I grew up in a I don't know what some would say is the downtown Cleveland that's the stereotype of 70s Rust Belt city.
Yeah.
But I actually knew it as a very cool place to ride my skateboard, as a very neat place to hang out, as really a place that was very much home, but also a place with really interesting random experiences. And I think if I had to pick out the strangest, it is meeting Miles Davis on a Sunday morning in the midst of downtown Cleveland. I was with my mom. We were actually just walking out of our apartment building, and this car pulls up, and someone gets out of the car and is looking for directions, and at some point asks, do you know who I am? Oh. And my mom, who was not necessarily a Miles Davis fan, basically said, I have no idea who you are. And he said, I'm like Miles Davis. And my mom was totally unimpressed with the fact that he was Miles Davis. It's the random things one runs into in the late 1970s,
right.
Downtown Cleveland growing up. But
that's fantastic. Yeah. Have you done much writing since then? I mean, do you still write essays? Do you write any fiction, nonfiction?
So I don't write much. I don't write fiction. I certainly anything that I would try to write as fiction would be so incredibly embarrassing, given that I am in the midst of such wonderful fiction writers of all stages here here at Kenyon. I did have an essay in another anthology that was published by the same group. It was called Red State Blues. That was also a little bit of a reflection of what life. So the anthology is called Red State Blues. My essay is looking at what's the perspective of a Clevelander now living in Knox County, and that boundary between going from a part of the state that is urban, industrial, just sort of culturally different, and what it means to live and observe life in a very different part of Ohio.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into the music, because that's what we play here on the radio.
Yeah.
I understand you brought a whole playlist.
I did. So of pretty eclectic things. So yes.
How would you? So we've already talked about this. We're starting with.
So we're going to start with Isaac Hayes, the theme from Shaft.
Great.
Hi, this is a special guest, Ian Rowe. I'm a freshman from Los Angeles, and I'm planning on pursuing a major in philosophy. My question for Decatur is, if a movie was to be made about your life, what the soundtrack would be, and if you could talk about certain songs and how that intertwines with like moments in your life?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. And no, it's well, yeah, reproducing a soundtrack. There's part of me that's tempted that sort of at least the instrumental piece of Theme from Shaft would be on the list, because I do think that is the best guitar riff from a movie theme song ever. So, but in terms of songs that intersect with my life, and I probably would have certainly different things representing different eras or different periods of things. I'm a huge Beatles fan, and particularly a John Lennon fan, and so there are many John songs from the Beatle catalog and John Lennon songs as solo pieces that I would choose. Some of them are, if I had to think of, this is tricky. Okay, so maybe I will place it on. So if I had to choose, say, a family, a sort of marriage family song, I'd choose maybe like the Beatles' Two of Us, which is just one of my favorite sort of just great songs in terms of describing long-term relationship and what that is like. If I had to choose sort of, a song about, trying to think of something about like work and ambition of sort of what I imagine in doing in my job, I probably would choose Imagine as like the, granted sort of stereotype of not terribly imaginative, no pun intended, but sort of a really great piece to choose. If I had to choose my sort of political anger song, I'd maybe choose like Woody Guthrie, All You Fascists, which is just a kind of great sort of, anger of the current political moment song that, written 70 years ago, but somehow still sort of echoing of current political moment. If I had to choose sort of a, what is a, kind of what would be speculating out as my like epitaph song of sort of so assuming this is a movie that is made after I am dead, what would be sort of tear-jerking song at the end of the credits be, and maybe like maybe the Beatles in My Life would be the kind of good sort of like tear-jerking song at the end. But no, that's a great question.
Yeah. And then I was wondering, like I've heard you're a big like Kendrick Lamar fan, so I was wondering like how you see like philosophy and like science and math like being connected in music, and like I know like Kendrick talks about like the butterfly effect, so he's like talking about like a chaos mathematical theory. But I was wondering if like there's some other artists that you think like do a great job of like highlighting that.
Yeah. No, and I think Kendrick Lamar has done really interesting stuff in using at least sort of scientific phrases that have fallen into the popular culture and really sort of using those as touchstones to talk about, or kind of windows to get into to other issues, which I think is really fascinating. What's interesting is I think actually not many people have done that as much. I maybe, it's actually an interesting question. If I had to go back and ask, if I got to interview Queen ever, and if any of the current living members of Queen are out there and would like to interview them, that would be great. But there is a band where the guitarist is now a PhD in astrophysics and is a pretty well respected mathematician and physicist on sort of that question of what are the connections between doing original pop music and thinking about one's life as a scientist. I know if I had to choose a fantasy career, bass player might be it, like bass player in a band, which I do think just playing the bass is the coolest instrument one can do in a band, and would be just a very fun thing to do. Unfortunately, I do not know how to play a bass or really any other instrument very well, and have no musical talent whatsoever, so there's no chance of my abandoning my Kenyon College gig to become a bass player in a band. But no, it's an intriguing thing to think about what the connections can be between, kind of using scientific data and information and ways of looking at the world as touchstones for windows in pop music.
Thank you very much.
Let's get on to the next song. What's next?
So I think we're going to jump ahead a few years and play some recent Cardi B, I Like It.
Great.
Hi, I'm Jack Sutherland. I'm also a freshman, and I have a President Sean Decatur related secret to divulge for this special show. A few months ago, I'm not sure if you remember, but there was an enormous picture of your face plastered on the wall outside of the library.
Yeah.
My secret is that I was one of the young fellows who was involved in putting that there. I was wondering what your it was the day after your birthday. I was wondering what your reaction to that was, and as a follow-up, how's your birthday?
Yes. It was somewhere in between, I think. So if I had embarrassment on one end of the axis, and just thinking it is just a very cool honor on the other end of the axis, some superposition of embarrassed and honored. No, it was very sweet, and so thank you, and thank you for the others to do it. And it was a fun birthday, and so it was really, it was. We are a pretty laid-back birthday family in our house, so we don't do sort of over-the-top birthday celebration things. But it was fun doing stuff with family, and certainly nice to feel appreciated by the campus. So thank you.
Sure, of course. I guess as a completely unrelated question, I'm going to steal one of the questions that Grant had prepared for the beginning, because I helped him through that. So you started out on more of the academic side with biochemistry, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how did you get from sort of pure academia to more of an administrative role?
Yeah, and so I started out as a faculty member at Mount Holyoke. So when I finished graduate school, I went straight to Mount Holyoke, and I began teaching there. And I was teaching and had a research lab with students. We looked at questions about protein structure, protein folding, and kind of protein dynamics. Totally into talking about that later if anyone has burning protein folding questions that they'd like to ask. But at some point, I also just started taking on more administrative responsibilities within the department. Mount Holyoke is a small college like Kenyon, and like Kenyon, the responsibility for chairing faculty departments rotates among colleagues in the department, and so it turned out I had a pretty early responsibility of being chair of the chemistry department there, and kind of taking up my turn to do it. And I discovered that I actually really liked being a department chair, and that sort of started the slope either down or up, depending on how one thinks about it, towards doing more administrative work. But it's been important to me to keep work in teaching and a connection to science and a connection to students all along the way. So I still do teach here at Kenyon. So I taught a course in the spring this past semester on bioluminescence, and so which was a lot of fun. And I'm not teaching this coming spring, but I will be teaching next spring. So anyone interested in a junior-senior chemistry seminar in spring of 2020, just kind of keep an eye out for one that will be out in the catalog, and I just really like the experience of being connected into the teaching part of my work, and also just having a chance to read the science literature and being connected on that end.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the aspects of administrating that you found that you've come to like? What do you miss from academia?
Yeah, so I actually like the problem-solving piece. In many ways, administration work is really just, I think of it as similar to the type of problem-solving one does in running a lab, but just on a different level and different types of issues and problems. And so I like the idea of taking on the big picture questions of what's important for the institution, and then trying to find ways to solve the challenges and to move the college forward. In many ways, it's leading the college. In some ways, this is oversimplifying it a bit, but it's a bit of a resource optimization problem. So I think there's a pretty good consensus on what it takes to make Kenyon a strong institution moving forward, that the important things are to have strong academics, which really boils down to a strong faculty, to have the resources available to bring the best and brightest students here to Gambier. And the challenge then is just how do we actually make sure that we are balancing the resources that are needed to support financial aid and support for students, to support the needs for faculty, and then support other opportunities for students, such as internships and opportunities to do creative work outside of the classroom. And so it simplifies it a bit to say that's basically like a giant chemistry problem, but involving people and money instead of molecules. But in a sense, it is a little bit like a giant chemistry problem that involves people and money instead of molecules. And so it's the type of thinking and problem solving in some ways is remarkably similar.
Let's do the next song.
Sure.
What's next?
So next, we actually have a bit of a deep cut from Gladys Knight and the Pips. Daddy Could Swear I Declare.
Hi, I'm Isaac Sage. I'm a freshman. I'm thinking about majoring in English with an emphasis in creative writing. And my question is, I came here partly because of film, and you talked a little bit about Shaft earlier. But when you were in college or high school or just like early years, like what were some films that like really like shaped you or like had an impact on you?
Yeah, and maybe if I could break into two categories, and like the maybe the movies that I just enjoy and watch over and over again, and just kind of bring joy to my heart. And then the films that sort of feel like films, capital F films that,
Right.
that I don't know, that I wrote papers about at some point,
Right.
as the things to do. Though in retrospect, I really should have written a paper about Empire Strikes Back, which would be on that list of things, of movies that,
Great
movie. of the Star Wars movies, Empire Strikes Back is still the one that I come and watch over and over again. But I'm a huge Star Wars fan of all types, and so love the Star Wars series. I'm also, I love science fiction movies. I love silly action movies. So, I mean, you guys have already heard me talk about the Fast and Furious series at Convocation, but I just love movies where things blow up and were really well done things blowing up. The first Die Hard, I think, is just still an amazing, fun movie to watch. It's kind of, if that is on TV, I will find Die Hard to watch. So, but I also love, like, strange, talky, romantic comedy movies as well. So I have a weird obsession with The American President, which is one of Aaron Sorkin's first big screenplays. And I think that is probably the non-Star Wars movie I have seen more than any other movie, and it's my go-to depression movie. Like if I am feeling really down on any given day, I will just watch The American President, and it's sort of, there's something about like the press conference scene at the end where like Michael Douglas comes in and does the thing that no president will do and sort of walk in the middle of a press conference and then sort of is honest about, I don't know, everything. And then he goes and he finds Annette Bening and, she says or he tells her, I didn't do that press conference just to win you back. And she says, I didn't come back just because like you're bringing the climate change bill to the floor. And it's sort of the kind of simultaneously geeky and most romantic thing ever that sort of one could see. So I have a really soft place for The American President.
Yeah.
And I was watching the other night, just in terms of bad romantic comedies, I don't know if folks know Music and Lyrics, the Drew Barrymore, Hugh Grant movie. Hugh Grant is an fading 80s pop star. Drew Barrymore is this kind of aspiring writer. They end up sort of becoming a songwriting duo. There are moments of stress because it's a romantic comedy. There have to be kind of moments of stress where they are kind of pulled apart, but then they come back together, and in the end, it's very happy. So I love kind of sappy romantic comedy movies. But then like the capital F films kind of movies that I'd point to, I love Apocalypse Now, I think is just, it's one of those things that's amazing that I've seen over and over again, and I kind of always find new layers of Apocalypse Now. I guess while we're on Coppola, I mean, the Godfather series, which kind of falls in between action movie and capital F film, but I actually really do find that those are movies I can watch over and over again and feel sort of really connected to and engaged with. I think just about anything by Stanley Kubrick, I think I also find that I really get sucked into quite a bit.
Yeah. The great movie, all great movies, some of my favorites.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, you're a big science guy. You teach science classes here. Science was sort of your career build-up. I love the genre of science fiction. I would like to write a science fiction movie or TV show really badly. What are some of your favorite? It doesn't have to just be movies; it can be books and TV shows too. But what are some of your favorite sci-fi stories? Some that are just you think could happen, they're really good about perfectly predicting the future.
Yeah.
And then some where they're just fun, cool concepts, not necessarily realistic, but as a science fan, just make you really happy.
Yeah. So. I think so. So definitely anything Star Wars related in terms of just generic pop culture science fiction that I really love. Actually, I like it's that sort of is that late night Saturday night where names are suddenly no longer coming to mind as quickly. It is. So the same writer for Colson Whitehead. Thank you. I'm now talking to myself. This is sort of Colson Whitehead. So before he wrote the Underground Railroad, actually, he's written in genres all over the place, and he has this great zombie book that is. So actually, yes, I see Grant is Googling. No, you're not Googling yet. So
I think I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
I know. It is the book
and
it is that Saturday night thing where I cannot actually remember it. But that is actually one of those books it's incredibly well done, and it's a really nuanced view of, or sort of using the traditional structure of a kind of sci-fi horror piece, but that's kind of an interesting insight into current dynamics, and that's the one that
I know exactly what you're talking.
Thank you.
That's right.
Zone 1 is so yes, for those out there, I would highly recommend Colson Whitehead Zone 1 as a piece of sort of a more I'd say more literary science fiction than any of the thousands of Star Wars books that are out there, which are also really interesting to read at any given moment.
Grant loves the Star Wars books. He's trying to pitch me the Star Wars books every day.
Yeah.
I'll convince you one day.
Okay.
Let's do the next song.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So we're going to go to some John Lennon. So whatever gets you through the night.
Welcome back. This is Mary, another freshman. And I have a question, maybe for some of our seniors out there looking to take a glide year. Not that any of us here would want this, but or that you even need this. But if you were to take a sabbatical year in the near future, what do you think you would do? Where would you go? What would you do?
Yeah, and I've thought about this in a lot of ways. There's part of me that would really love to connect to some different areas of science that I've just had some flavors of that I'd love to learn more about. And so, the whole field of neuroscience has changed so much since I was a college student. There was there was no such thing as an undergraduate neuroscience major when I was in college, and that's just a field of study that I just find myself more and more interested in and fascinated by. And I thought about that, if I had a year to go totally learn something new, neuroscience would be high on my list. There's also just, there are some things that I'd love to just strengthen about writing a bit. And so if I had the ability just to go somewhere and write, that would be really interesting in some ways. I find that, and this might be a function of aging, that the older I get, the more just interesting perspective that I feel that I'd like to share and write about and find ways to capture. And I think writing is one of those things that you get better at it the more you do. And so the idea of having just a big expanse of time just to work on an extended writing project, I think seems really attractive. I also never studied abroad. It's one of the things that if I had to list my biggest regret of my college experience, it's not taking time to have a truly broader global international experience. So I've now had the chance to travel abroad a bit in my career, but never really live abroad for an extended period of time. And so that's something else that I've thought of, that if I had the the magic gift of a sort of instant sabbatical at some point, spending some time to live abroad would be really interesting.
Where would you go?
Where would I go? And so I studied as my language in both high school and college Latin, which was great, and I loved classics. I still love classics, and it's got many things out of it. But it does restrict one in terms of one's ability to speak the language in many countries that one goes to. So Italy is of interest, and so it would actually, I think it would be a great place to go. Or I think actually also thinking about places in the UK, which would be interesting. But yeah.
As a fellow Latin student myself, I can appreciate
yes,
that.
Yes.
What made you take Latin in the first place?
I actually just, it's one of those things that I've had an amazing Latin teacher in high school. And one of the best teachers in the languages, Mr. Bresnicki, who passed away just a couple years ago, but I sort of remembered really quite well and quite fondly. Was just an amazing teacher, a warm teacher, connected with students, and it was just all those things that one wants in an excellent teacher, right? And so it was just a great attraction to study Latin, and then I got sucked in by the ability to, I loved reading Roman history and kind of getting, going down the classics rabbit hole. And so, and one of the great things about going to a liberal arts college was that, I was interested in the sciences, but I could also spend a lot of time, I continued to take Latin, I continued to take courses in the classics, and, that I really valued being able to balance out my overall academic experience with those things.
Did you study Greek as well?
No, so I didn't study Greek. That's sort of, I wish I had, but no, I only did Latin. So are you doing Greek or?
I am not. No, I'm Latin.
Yes, so only Latin. Only
yes.
Latin. Yes.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, what is up on the next?
So next, Billy Bragg and Wilco doing a Woody Guthrie tune, Against the Law.
Hi, this is Logan. I'm a freshman as well, and my question for you is, if you were stranded on a desert island and you could only take a few things with you, things like movies, TV, albums, books, anything like that, what would those be and why?
Yeah. So I'll start with books. I mean, this is Kenyon, right? So we have to start with books. Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man would be number one. And Toni Morrison, Beloved would maybe be number two. The Parting the Waters volumes, sort of the history of the civil rights movement by Taylor Branch. It's a 3-volume set. If folks out there haven't read it, this is like a pitch to go start reading instantly. Starting with Parting the Waters and kind of going through the whole series, but that would certainly be on the list. So I think that would maybe be my kind of critical list of books to bring, except that I guess that, so maybe I should ask, though I'm thinking like, well, if we can bring movies or TV, so electronic things are okay. So
sure,
do we have to actually worry about power, or will we have solar powered chargers on our kind of isolated desert island?
Let's say you have some power source.
There we go. So yeah, TV. And it may be, so the TV series that I've been maybe most obsessed with recently is The Good Place. And it just, I don't know why I'm obsessed. I just actually think it does a very interesting, it's interesting universe creation, right? In terms of the conceptualization and the way in which it can weave discussions of ethical philosophy in a totally ludicrous, silly context. And though I'm not quite sure, so I'm currently obsessed with The Good Place. I don't know if that kind of meets the all-time thing that I could watch over and over again for all of eternity. I may have to go to something like either just total comfort food like Happy Days, which is absolutely meaningless, but it just brings back memories of youth and is great. Or something like Breaking Bad as a, I'm assuming that if I watch Breaking Bad over and over again for all of eternity, I will maybe find all of the Easter eggs that are hidden like throughout the whole thing. And so it would actually be a kind of interesting thing to do. And then movies, it's like Star Wars. I would bring all of them, maybe not Solo, but like everything except Solo. Yeah, I'm seeing a shocked expression. So, and Donald Glover is amazing in Solo.
I thought the rest of it, I was sort of, it was fine. But I don't know. Yes, we can talk later about Solo as a piece, but no, I would definitely, I could watch sort of Star Wars on infinite loop, and The American President. So if I had like the complete collection of Star Wars and The American President, I'd be pretty happy.
Sure. Any albums?
Any albums? Okay, so if I had to choose, like, say, maybe one thing from the Beatles, would either be White Album or Abbey Road. Maybe White Album because it's longer.
Yeah. Did you see they just released
exactly
yesterday?
So I have not. Yes, and it is. I've been told by my family that I should not buy it in anticipation of holiday gifts, and so because I have done that in the past where I've just actually bought whatever the thing is that comes out. So I am holding out until Christmas with the kind of hope that it might materialize on Christmas Day. But yeah, so White Album I think would be on the list. Something from the wonderful golden era of Stevie Wonder, maybe Songs in the Key of Life, but which, any of the like early 70s Stevie Wonder albums, which are quite possibly like some of the best albums ever. That would probably be, Born to Run, which I can listen to over and over again. That would probably be my top album list.
Those are all great.
Yeah.
How about works of art? Maybe that's too broad, too expansive. I don't know if you can come up with those on the top of your head.
I know,
but
it is the works of art. I could maybe do artists.
Okay, sure.
In the or could I do artists? I could maybe do genres. I would say it's something impressionist, just because I think that is nice and calming, and assuming that one is alone on a desert island, one may want to be more calmed rather than sort of stimulated. Then yes, something as a nice Monet piece. I was just, this actually ties together art and biochemistry in that there are. Monet did several pieces that are late career and early career where he painted the same thing, but Monet had late in life cataracts, and then eventually had cataract surgery, and you can actually follow the change in his vision over the course of his career as he painted things. So there are a series of paintings of a Japanese bridge that he did, that late career, early career, mid-career, late career, that changes, his vision changes. So why am I bringing this up? Because like a lot of my biochemistry research has been on understanding the protein misfolding processes behind cataracts, and that cataracts are because you form out of accumulation of misfolded protein in the lens of the cell, in the lens of the eye, which makes it hard to see through and makes the vision a bit blurry, and so you can follow. So in any case, so maybe I would bring Monet, because I could continue to obsess over the biochemistry problems that I still continue to obsess over now, on understanding how actually basically the sort of refraction of light changes and affects vision and perception of color, and you can actually really see it pretty crisply in how Monet's art changes over the course of various periods of his life. We got on this by talking about artists that visual art we'd bring, so I'll just maybe leave it. Yes, Monet. And bring some Monet.
Okay. That sounds great. What do we have up next for the songs?
What do we have up next? So actually, speaking of both Stevie Wonder and the Beatles, this is Stevie Wonder doing a cover of We Can Work It Out.
It's hard to believe, but it's almost 10 p.m., meaning this show is almost done. This hour has flown by. President Decatur, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute blast having you. Your music is great. You're just such a cool president. So, just again, thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, you're always welcome back. Always welcome back.
Yes, just let me know. Glad to do it.
So that's it for this first little stretch of a Jolt of Holt. We're actually going on a little hiatus, but we will be back on December 1st. So until then, I'm Grant Holt. Good night.